You just got your paycheck. Finally. You worked 50 hours this week, maybe more. You open up your bank account and there it is. Except wait, that number looks wrong. You earned $4,000, but somehow only $3,000 showed up. Federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare, they all took their cut before you even saw a dime. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, this is just how it works. Everyone pays taxes. That's the deal. Meanwhile, Elon Musk reportedly paid zero federal income taxes in 2018. Jeff Bezos? Same story in 2007 and 2011. Warren Buffett famously admitted he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. And you're over here getting 25% yanked out of your paycheck for showing up to work on time. Here's the thing. They're not breaking the law. They're not hiding money in offshore accounts or doing anything illegal. They're using a strategy that's been sitting right in front of everyone for decades, and almost nobody outside of wealth management circles talks about it. This is Pixovaa, where I spend way too much time thinking about the legal loophole rich people use to borrow without paying taxes. If you're someone who feels like the system is rigged against regular earners, who watches their paycheck get sliced up every 2 weeks while billionaires seem to float above it all, hit subscribe and smash that thumbs up, because today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most powerful wealth strategies in existence. Now look, I need you to understand something before we go any further. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This isn't me yelling about the 1% and shaking my fist at the sky. This is tax code. This is how the rules are actually written. And once you see how this works, you'll understand why wealthy people think about money completely differently than the rest of us. The strategy is called buy, borrow, die. And yes, that's actually what financial advisors call it. Sounds morbid, sounds weird, but it's devastatingly effective. Let me break down exactly how this works with real numbers, because this is where it gets interesting. Imagine you bought Amazon stock in 2010. You put in $100,000. Today, that investment is worth around $2 million. Congratulations, you're sitting on nearly $2 million in gains. You're rich on paper. But here's the problem. The second you sell that stock, you owe long-term capital gains tax on your profit. At the federal level, that's 20% for high earners, plus a 3.8% net investment income tax, plus potentially state taxes depending on where you live. In California, you're looking at over 30% total. On a $1.9 million gain, that's roughly $570,000 going straight to the government. So what do wealthy people do? They don't sell. Here's what most people don't realize. In America, you only pay capital gains tax when you sell an asset and realize the gain. If you never sell, you never owe. Your stock can go from $100,000 to $10 million to $50 million, and as long as you hold it, you owe nothing. But wait, you're probably thinking, what good is money you can't spend? Having $50 million in stock doesn't pay for your private jet, your yacht, your third vacation home in Aspen? This is exactly the question wealthy people solved decades ago. Instead of selling the stock and paying taxes, they walk into a bank and say, I have $50 million in assets. Give me a loan. And the bank says, absolutely. Here's $10 million at 2 or 3% interest whenever you're ready. Now you might be thinking, okay, but a loan isn't real money. You have to pay it back eventually. You're just delaying the problem. And that's true, you do have to pay it back, but here's the psychological shift that separates wealthy thinking from middle-class thinking. They're not paying it back with earned income. They're paying it back with more borrowed money, or dividends, or strategic asset sales done over decades to minimize tax impact. Or, and this is the real move, they're not paying it back at all. They die. And when they die, something magical happens in the tax code. It's called the stepped-up basis, and it's the reason generational wealth compounds while working-class families stay stuck. Let me show you exactly how this works with real numbers, because the math is almost offensive. You bought that stock for $100,000. It's now worth $50 million. You borrowed against it your entire life, living lavishly, never paying a cent in capital gains tax. Then you pass away and leave that stock to your children. Under current law, your heirs don't inherit your original cost basis of $100,000. They inherit the stock at its current fair market value, $50 million. So if they sell it the next day for $50 million, they owe zero capital gains tax. The $49.9 million in appreciation? Gone. Erased from the tax code. Never taxed.
A 2021 study from the Federal Reserve estimated that approximately 42% of capital gains go completely untaxed because of this stepped-up basis loophole. 42%. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars every year that simply evaporates from the tax base because of this single rule. Now look, I know what some of you are thinking. This doesn't apply to me. I don't have $50 million. I'm just trying to pay rent. And I hear you. But here's where this actually does matter for regular people, and it's not just theoretical. First, understanding how the wealthy operate changes how you think about your own money. The reason most people stay broke isn't because they don't earn enough. It's because they think about money like employees instead of owners. Employees trade time for money and get taxed at the highest rates. Owners hold assets and get taxed on their terms, or not at all. Second, this strategy scales down. You don't need $50 million to borrow against assets. You can do this with a margin loan on a brokerage account. You can do this with a home equity line of credit. You can do this with securities-backed lines of credit that some brokerages offer to accounts with as little as $100,000 in investments. Let me give you a more relatable example. Say you've been investing consistently for 15 years. You've got $300,000 in a taxable brokerage account. About half of that, $150,000, is unrealized capital gains. If you sold everything to buy a house, you'd owe roughly $30,000 in taxes. Or you could take a securities-backed line of credit, borrow $100,000 for your down payment at maybe 5% interest, keep your investments growing, and never trigger that tax event. Your investments might return 8 to 10% annually while you're paying 5% on borrowed money. That's called positive arbitrage. You're borrowing cheap money to preserve assets that grow faster than the loan costs. Is this risky? Yes, absolutely. If the market tanks, you could face margin calls. If interest rates spike, your carrying costs go up. This is not a strategy for people without substantial cushions and solid financial literacy. But the point isn't that you should do exactly what billionaires do. The point is that you should understand the game being played. Because right now, you're following rules designed for the working class, while the wealthy are playing by a completely different set of guidelines. Guidelines that are perfectly legal and available to anyone who understands them. Here's the thing that actually makes me frustrated about this whole situation. This information isn't hidden, it's not a secret, but nobody teaches it. Not in high school, not in college, not in most financial literacy programs. Why? Because the system benefits from you not knowing. When you think selling assets is the only way to access money, you sell. When you sell, you pay taxes. When you pay taxes, the government gets its cut and you have less money to reinvest. Your wealth grows slower. Your kids start further behind. The cycle continues. When wealthy families understand that borrowing against assets lets them access money without selling, they preserve their tax-advantaged positions indefinitely. Their wealth compounds uninterrupted. Their children inherit stepped-up positions. The gap widens. So what can you actually do with this information? Let me give you some concrete steps. 1. Start prioritizing asset accumulation over income maximization. I know that sounds backwards when you're struggling to pay bills, but every dollar you put into appreciating assets is a dollar that can eventually work for you on terms the tax code actually favors. 2. Learn about margin loans and securities-backed lines of credit. These aren't just for the ultra-wealthy. If you have a brokerage account through Fidelity, Schwab, or similar firms, you may already have access to these products. Understand how they work, their risks, and their potential applications. 3. Start thinking multi-generationally. I know that sounds crazy when you're in your 20s or 30s just trying to survive, but the stepped-up basis means that assets you hold until death transfer to your heirs tax-free in a way that liquidated assets never can. Building something that outlasts you isn't just about legacy, it's literally more tax-efficient. 4. Consult actual professionals before implementing any of this. I'm not a financial advisor or a tax attorney. These strategies carry real risks, and the specifics depend heavily on your individual situation. But now you know the questions to ask. Here's what most people don't realize about wealth in America. It's not about how much you earn, it's about how much you keep and how long you can keep it growing untouched. The tax code was written, intentionally or not, to favor those who hold assets over those who earn wages. Once you understand that fundamental truth, you start making different decisions. You stop thinking about money as something you earn, spend, and save. You start thinking about money as something you accumulate, leverage, and transfer. The billionaires figured this out decades ago. Their advisors built strategies around it. Their families have been compounding wealth through it for generations. Now, you know too. What you do with this knowledge is up to you, but I'll tell you this much. The worst thing you can do is nothing. The worst thing you can do is keep playing by rules you didn't even know existed, while wondering why the scoreboard never seems to move in your favor. The game isn't fair, but now you know how it's played. Go make something of that.